Welcome to the SDGs Climate Change and City Symposium. I'm Sarah Forde, Director of Projects and Programs with the Business Council of Sustainable Development Australia. We work with forward-thinking companies to accelerate the SDGs. Can I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that we meet? I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and we would like to extend our respect to any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us today. I'd like to welcome you to this City Partnership session. This is your opportunity to hear from cities participating in the SDGs Cities Challenge. Following an overview from each city, we will be taking questions and comments. I'm going to now introduce the speakers for today. Firstly, we have Thomas Jacobs, Project Coordinator for the SDGs Cities Challenge and Project Officer for the Innovate for Cities projects within the Connected Cities Lab. Our SDG City Challenge representatives, Emily Davies O'Sullivan, City Activation Officer from the City of Newcastle, Jared Henley, Manager Sustainable Campus Design at the University of Melbourne, and Sabaresh Suresh, Consultant with the Dehradun Smart City in Northern India. I encourage you to share any research, links or thoughts throughout the session, and you can do that in the chat feature, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. There's also a Q&A after each of our participants have spoken, and please feel free to put your questions in the tab also. If you have any technical issues, there is an event support tab at the top of the screen. If you can just post it there, someone will assist you. Thank you for joining us. I'm now going to turn over to Thomas Jacobs to introduce the SDG Cities Challenge. Thank you. Thomas.
Thanks, Sarah, and welcome everyone to session 1B. It's turning out to be a jam-packed and very interesting session. So look forward to all of your questions, and we'll get right to it. So the Connected Cities Lab partnered with the Business Council for Sustainable Development Australia and the Banksia Foundation have sought to identify the best approach for cities to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals through this participatory action research project. The SDGs Cities Challenge, which we launched at the World Urban Forum in February in Abu Dhabi, asked 10 participant cities from Asia-Pacific region, 5 from inside Australia and 5 from the region, to align an existing or new project to a key urban SDGs target within SDG 11. So the idea behind this strategy is that cities can then begin their journey of learning about and engaging with the SDGs through focusing on one SDG to begin with, in this case SDG 11, the city's SDG, or urban SDG, and then use that knowledge to expand, align, embed the targets and indicators into their city challenge solutions, as well as to educate those around them within their city and community. We recognize that there's a wealth of resources available for cities and businesses to support the implementation of the SDGs. However, it's not always easy to find a methodology that best fits the city's local context or to identify appropriate local solutions. So the SDG Cities Challenge links those cities with urban partners in academia, business, and community in a structured process of co-design. This aimed to create innovative approaches for cities to accelerate action towards the SDGs using an initiative or project to which they've already committed within their city. So solutions relating to this project might have been worked through via collaborative process using knowledge and practical expertise in local government, academia, business, and civil society, as I said before, offering each city the opportunity to produce some sort of either an implementation plan or steps to move forward, as well as ultimately something that looks like a voluntary local review process or the beginnings of a VLR process. We've just completed 2 days of intensive workshops this past Monday and Tuesday that aim to give our participating cities the opportunity to share their experiences and urban challenges, as well as their progress in mapping their work against the SDGs with experts' support from a diverse group of urban stakeholders. So I'm really looking forward, and I hope you are as well, to hearing from the cities today about their city challenges and about their learnings from the challenge and possible linkages they have to the SDGs. So I might now turn it over to Emily Davies O'Sullivan, who is the city representative for City of Newcastle. Emily?
Thank you, Thomas. Yes, I would like to start by personally acknowledging the traditional owners of the land which I'm speaking today. I'm in Newcastle in New South Wales, and the traditional land of the Awabakal and Worimi people. And I encourage you on the call today to post in the chat the custodians of your land as a sign of acknowledgement yourselves. So, I have 10 minutes to tell you who I am, tell you about my amazing city, and to tell you about the journey we've been on with the SDGs City Challenge. So it's a bit of an undertaking, but let's see how we go. So this is me. I'm really sorry that I can't meet you all in person, but thanks COVID, unfortunately we're doing this virtually, so I thought at least you can see a nice photo of me. This is me on the ferry actually. So I'm the City Activation Officer, as Sarah said, at the City of Newcastle. I have 3 kids and a husband, and I'm passionate about yoga, about bike riding, and you might notice I'm a bit passionate about talking too. I am really passionate about good urban planning, and that's why SDG 11 is actually my favourite. And fun fact, I'm left-handed as well. So I want to tell you a bit about my amazing city before I launch into the challenge. So I'm keen to hear who's listening in has actually been to Newcastle, New South Wales, as opposed to any other Newcastle in the world, because there's a lot, and what fun facts you might know about Newcastle. So we're obviously located in New South Wales on just 2 hours north of Sydney. And it's a perfect city in a lot of ways. We're actually technically called a Goldilocks city, not too hot, not too cold, and kind of that theme kind of continues on. You know, we've got a really nice mix of heritage, and as you can see from this image, you know, the character of the city is really defined by being a coastal city and also by our harbour. You know, we've got a massive working harbour, which you might have heard about. Oh, good beer. That's a good thing to be known for. I can see in the chat, Jared. Thank you. And yeah, I'm going to send some subliminal messages through my presentation actually about how beautiful Newcastle is. So you'll have to keep watching. So the next slide here, I just wanted to do for all the number people out there. And I just wanted to draw your attention to some specific facts about Newcastle. So you can see there the population. We have a population of about 160,000, but we're expecting quite a lot of growth. And the thing to also keep in mind is that Newcastle is the centre kind of for a broader region, you know. So you can see there that we've got quite a large commuter population as well, which is really essential. So there's a lot of people who are coming into Newcastle to work as our LGA boundaries I'm talking about here, and a lot of people obviously living here, but and big projected growth. Another interesting fact that I'd like to draw your attention to is that our median age, as you can see there, it's 37, and I checked with the ABS just recently, and it's actually gone down to 36. But we have a very high proportion of young people in Newcastle too. We're quite a young city for, you know, nationally. In comparison, and our major industries here might surprise you. In the LGA, our largest employer is actually healthcare and social services, and we have a really strong manufacturing sector. So those are some things that you may not have been expecting about our city as well. So the next slide here is who is the City of Newcastle. So I work for the City of Newcastle, but what am I talking about there? Well, we're a local municipal council, and we provide services and facilities to our community. We're governed by 12 elected councillors, and we've got 1 popularly elected mayor as well, and the organisation itself is run by the CEO. We manage about $2 billion worth of assets, which I think sounds like quite a large number. And you can see there on the other side of that slide, there's a fun little diagram that I've actually pulled from our budget. But you can see it gives you a bit of a sense of where our funds go or what we spend our money on. And in particular, I'd like to highlight the 336 million that we spend on community services. So yeah, quite a considerable sum as well. So this next slide is the journey that we've been on with the SDGs. So the City of Newcastle got on board pretty early on in the piece. Obviously, the SDGs started existing in 2015, and we were pretty focused on them from an early point. I just wanted to pull out some key points here in this timeline. One is that in July 2018, we actually aligned our community strategic plan to the SDGs. And last year, for our annual report, we ensured that it was in the annual report as well. So those were two very significant things that we've done to ensure that our organisation is really focused on the SDGs. As you can see there's some other projects that we've done around collaboration, which we're really proud of. So what is our city challenge? So we're starting to get some traction, as you can see from that timeline, around the SDGs. And we've started to do some really great projects in this space. But when we came across the University of Melbourne and Banksia Foundation City Challenge, it really sparked our interest because we felt like we needed just a bit more oomph, I guess. You know, we're a really lucky place here in Newcastle because we've got political willpower and we've got resources behind implementation of the SDGs. But as you can imagine, I'm sure probably everyone here is quite aware of the big tasks that embedding and applying the SDGs is. It's quite hard to know, you know, what to drive first in this space. So embedding in our reports is really important. And as I drew your attention to before, we have done some work in that space, but that was certainly an area that we knew we wanted to do better in, and particularly around accountability for the organisation. So just to give you a bit of context when I'm talking about this reporting, in New South Wales, we work within the Integrated Planning and Reporting Framework, which is legislated through the Local Government Act. And I've heard some talk this week of, I think Victoria's just introduced a new act for their local government. So it's quite interesting. And I think that they have gone down a similar road by the sounds of it to what we've got here. So you can see on that diagram on the left that the Community Strategic Plan sort of sits at the top of the reporting cycle here. And we report on a 4-yearly cycle reviewing the CSP. And you can see our Community Strategic Plan, or CSP, is on the other side of the slide there, and it's the Newcastle 2030 plan. So that plan is reviewed every 4 years, but we have ongoing reporting through our annual report and also quarterly reporting and our budget cycle as well. And that's all embedded in that framework under the Local Government Act. So the really important point that I want to make about the Community Strategic Plan is that it contains the city's vision, which is also the community's vision. They've given it to us through community consultation. And this is our vision. In 2030, Newcastle will be a smart, livable, sustainable, global city. And you have bolded global there because I really see that is where our commitment to the SDGs really lies for the City of Newcastle. So, making the system work for us. You know, we've got this state system, and then how do we get it moving for us? So I've touched on the vision, but I think the other thing that I wanted to highlight within the CSP is these 4 key questions which it answers. Where are we now? How will we get there? Where do we want to be in 10 years? And how will we know when we've arrived? So I think this is really essential to keep in the back of your mind, and it's come through quite strongly in the webinars that I've attended through this symposium and also through the in-depth workshops which Thomas spoke about earlier. So if we can just go to the next slide, I've just pulled out one of the pages of the CSP, and you can see here the other really essential thing is that the CSP embeds the community indicators, and that is what the City of Newcastle is kind of marking itself against to say, have we done well, have we not done well? So that's our indicator framework, and that brings me to what our actual challenge that we set ourselves was. So you might remember before I touched on that we wanted to be more accountable and more embedded with the SDGs. So the way that we proposed to do that was by localizing the indicators of the SDGs and incorporating them within our city indicator framework, and which, as you can see, was embedded through the CSP. So the outcomes that we're hoping to achieve by doing that is accountability, as I said, and alignment with the strategies and plans which sit below the CSP. So the CSP is our ultimate document, and all the strategies that we have, such as housing strategies, such as our climate action plan, they all sit below and they need to align up. But this indicator framework hopefully would then flow through all of those. And it would also, having the indicator framework aligning with the SDGs would also help with our reporting. So we want to be really transparent with the community and say, this is where we are, this is where we're going, this is how we're doing it. And we see that as being essentially done through really good reporting. So what have we learnt so far? 17 SDGs, that's a lot, right? And 169 targets, that's a lot too. 231 unique indicators. It's easy to get lost, right? So I think the main thing we learned is break it down into manageable bite-sized pieces. So identifying the steps, and just like at the gym on the Stairmaster, you take one step at a time and you slowly get there, right? Ensure that meaningful alignment. I heard someone speaking in the week about cube wash. No one wants the SDG cube wash to happen. We want real, tangible alignment and action at the end of the day so that we get to that 2030 goal. So another really important takeaway that we've learned so far, I think, is the value of a vision and supporting objectives. And that's why I sort of took the time to set the context there with our community strategic plan, because I actually think that has been instrumental in terms of us being able to leverage both internally and externally progressing the SDGs as an agenda. And then we're part of a bigger picture, obviously. I mean, I think a lot of people have been talking about the SDGs as a common language for cities to cities and also globally. We can talk that common language. We may not, agree on everything, but that is something that we can all agree on. So my final slide, I hope, for you guys, is what the SDGs City Challenge has given to us. So I think these are the main things that I've pulled out. I must admit that we've really enjoyed being part of this whole project. But what's been great is that reassurance that we are on the right path. It can be overwhelming, but we are progressing. That collaboration is so essential, and particularly between our sister cities. We have learnt a lot, I think, through the challenge from each other, as well as obviously the experts. But yeah, I think that's probably been the surprising aspect. At a city level, I think we need to be sitting up and taking notice of what other cities are doing, and also what business is doing, because they're making some real headway, and we've got a lot to learn. One maybe controversial one is making the SDGs work for our city. So thinking about the context of individual cities and how they might work within that context, applying localized indicators where appropriate has been something that's come out, and that's been really liberating for us as well, because some things, square peg round hole, I think the saying is, we just weren't quite getting there. But having that reassurance that no, what works for Newcastle, what actually is our context, and how do we apply local indicators for that context, has been really important. So we know this is a really big project, and it's a journey. It's not about getting there tomorrow. It's certainly not going to happen tomorrow. But head down and keep on that Stairmaster, and we'll get there.
Emily, thank you so much.
Go for 10 minutes.
Oh, yeah. You did it. Yeah. Thank you very much, Emily, and City of Newcastle. I want to jump right to Jared. We'll do questions after all the cities have presented. We'll go to Jared Healy, University of Melbourne, Estate Planning and Development.
Great. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Emily. That's given me a hard act to follow. But, I'd like to, I suppose, introduce myself. So I'm the Manager of Sustainable Campus Design for the University of Melbourne. So that means I'm on the non-academic side of the university, and I'm presenting our estate planning and development team in the Cities Challenge. So taking the university as a quasi-city and piggybacking on all the great work the other cities are doing. Now, because I'm, I suppose, representing one team within the broader university, I thought it'd be important to give you some context. So I'll start by just reflecting on the university as an organisation and a community. So based on our 2019 annual report, we had in the order of 54,000 students, almost half of those international students from about 150 countries, just over 9,000 staff, and potentially hundreds of thousands of alumni. In terms of the university as a physical place, if we could just go to the next slide. The university as a place is actually a number of places. We have a number of campuses across Victoria. Our main campus is in the suburb of Parkville, just north of the Melbourne CBD, which is the picture on the left-hand side. And by various measures, about 90% of our activity is at that campus. And that campus is supported by a number of specialist campuses in South Bank for arts, in Burnley in Melbourne suburb for horticulture, Werribee for vet science, and also a 2,400 hectare farm at Dookie, which is the in central Victoria, in the picture in the middle. So on various measures, we are city, a city in scale. We could just go to the next slide, please. As I said, estate planning and development is one team within the broader university's activities. And so I'll need to give you some perspective on how the university more broadly has engaged with the SDGs before digging into what it means for the built environment side of the university. So the engagement started back in 2016 under our previous Vice-Chancellor, Glyn Davis, who signed a university commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals, along with a number of other universities. Earlier this year, the university released its 10-year strategy called Advancing Melbourne. That document reaffirms the importance of sustainability as something that the university can help deliver and help progress the world towards. The document itself doesn't really mention the SDGs explicitly, but discussions internally are exploring, as I understand it, how the SDGs might play a role in metrics behind that, but it's too early to say exactly how that might pan out. If we could go to the next slide, though. But the university has made some public statements and affirmations in relation to the SDGs. So, for example, the University of Melbourne was the only university to be a signatory to an open letter written by the Global Compact Network recently to the Prime Minister of Australia, advocating that the SDGs be part of the framework for the COVID recovery. So the university is clearly holding the SDGs up as something that we should all be working towards. Now, in terms of the academic side of things, the university has a number of different research institutes, centres, and faculties who are quite heavily involved in the SDGs. I've just got 4 examples up here, both research and teaching and learning side of things. So the university more broadly has I suppose, both a commitment and has made public statements, in support of the SDGs. So really what that does then is ask the question of how are we actually practicing what we preach, so to speak, in terms of our built environment. So if we could go to the next slide, thank you. So the university has been quite active in sustainability in terms of our own operations and campuses for many years. In recent times, this is demonstrated by our sustainability plan, which was released in 2017, and we've been reporting on over the last few years. That current plan comes to an end this year, and we're in the process of doing some internal consultation to develop the next plan. This plan, it touches on the SDGs and the reports. So if you could just go back a slide. Thanks, Stephanie. It touches on the SDGs, acknowledging our commitment, but the SDGs weren't central to how that sustainability plan was structured. It was structured based on a very detailed and thorough consultation with staff and students, and so it was responding to the particular issues and concerns that were raised, from that group of stakeholders, rather than linking in with the sort of, I suppose, global frameworks. But we have started within the reporting mapping, at least at the goal level, to the activities. But I suppose at that reporting level are wary, as others have mentioned, about being wary of cube wash, rainbow wash, whatever term we want to use, about the credibility of being able to claim that a certain activity is aligned to the SDGs. Next slide, please. So for at the estate level, which is where I particularly work, over the last sort of 18 months, we have started to look at embedding the SDGs in our thinking around campus distinct planning, looking at to what extent the SDGs provide a useful framework to guide sort of master plan development activities. And really the motivation for getting involved in the Cities Challenge to try and formalise that more, to something Emily said. My early experience in looking at the SDGs and trying to map was really wondering, can change the SDGs to make them more locally relevant, or does that sort of reduce the credibility of what we're doing? So the questions that I came to the Cities Challenge with was, as it says there on the slide, when localising SDGs, how much can you modify something and still credibly claim it is aligned, it is an SDG, or aligned to the SDGs? Related to that, it is about how we can succinctly communicate that to key stakeholders, so that they do support the credibility and don't think it's just an exercise in rainbow washing. And another thing that I was looking for from the challenge was examples of where localisation has happened elsewhere, and particularly around the built environment as opposed to, I suppose, organisational planning. Next slide, please. So just a few initial thoughts so far on the program. It's been a great learning experience, and I suppose the first thing I got from it and was grateful for was to realise that localisation is actually a thing. That it is valid to localise, to adjust the SDGs in some way to make them locally relevant, but also coming to appreciate that by the nature of doing that, it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. So localised SDGs inherently might look different for different cities or different organisations. And I know the speaker in a session this morning from the City of Melbourne talked about the challenge of making things locally relevant but still comparable at the national or international level. And there's a balance to be found there. Something else, as I've come to learn more about this localisation process, is the importance of, I suppose, your stakeholder perspectives in that localisation. That localisation, might mean localising to a certain geographic area, but I think particularly for the university, where we have a number of different campuses, it's about localising to particular stakeholder groups or almost populations, and that different. Certainly, my experience within the university is that different stakeholder groups might have different views, and so what that might mean is that what makes for a meaningful localised SDG for one stakeholder group isn't the same for another necessarily. And the last thing that I'm still grappling with is whether the SDGs should be really in the foreground or the background of how we manage sustainability. You know, having a lot of activity in sustainability for many years, that means we do have a certain legacy in terms of frameworks, ways we've been communicating sustainability engagement activities. And so I imagine there's a balance between continuing on how we've been doing it, which staff and students might be more familiar with, versus bringing in this more globally connected framework. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks very much, Jared. That was fantastic, and I'm certainly looking forward to the discussion around that localization of the SDGs, especially in the university context. So we will get into that for sure. Okay, and our third city representative that we will be speaking with is Sabresh Suresh from the city of Dehradun. Take it away, Sabresh.
Thanks, Thomas. So hey all, I am Sabresh. I represent the city of Dehradun, and we have been working on different levels of projects, and I've been working on as a consultant in this project called the Child Friendly City, which I'll be talking about in detail. But just for the benefit of the viewers, just to position it geographically and also in terms of the size and densities. The city of Dehradun is the capital city of the state called Uttarakhand in India. And we are a city that is nearing 1 million plus population and a quite dense environment. The city is also called as the gateway to some of these heritage centers of the northern India called Rishikesh and Haridwar. Apart from this, like most of the Indian cities, India is going to be the stage for the largest urban transition that is set to unfold in this next whole decade. This transition is going to bring us a lot of opportunities through economic growth, but at the same time, we're going to grapple at some of these pressing concerns like climate change and inequality. So looking at this challenge that was best hard on us, the Government of India launched this national mission called the Smart Cities Challenge, by which each of these cities had to kind of apply for a grant in terms of saying how they are going to really improve the livability of the cities, and based on which they would get funding. So the Dehradun Smart City is a special purpose vehicle set up as an urban local body to primarily plug in the infrastructure services that would be helping to improve the livability of the city. So we were one among the 100 cities that were actually selected as a part of the Smart Cities Challenge to enable such a sort of an infrastructure that will help them to kind of envision a city that is trying to improve the livability standards that are there. Interestingly, this was in the background at which the agenda was also being set up, and that gave these an opportunity to try and look at frameworks to envision a city that also kind of helps them to try and take an approach to report something on these standards. The only factor being that because governance in India is very fragmented and it is not really one person or one council oriented decision. So that becomes very difficult to set up a strategic target because your accountability doesn't become very easy for you to enable some of these conversations. Hence, the choice was to kind of look at more sort of a project-based approach. So we had SDGs as a framework, but most of it was mostly to try and look at it as a project-based, rather than looking at it as a vision document or something of that sort. So the focus goal automatically came to SDG 11, primarily because of the interlinkages that it tries to boast about, and also in the way that it really tried to target about some of the pressing issues most of the cities really talked about. And in our consultation with people, most of them talked about the access to mobility, water and sanitation facilities, something that the SDG 11 primarily puts itself in terms of the exploration towards sustainability. Among the list of, I would say, it's an entire laundry list of problems that the city tries to face. But the biggest priority that became a pressing concern was the urban transportation issue that the city was trying to face. Now, as I was saying, that Dehradun as a city is positioned topographically on a higher level, and it's nestled between the mountains. So, service delivery with respect to transportation becomes higher and more difficult. And this has also caused us in terms of externalities, an increase in terms of private transportation, and also caused a severe amount of concerns with respect to safety and accessibility. This kind of coupled with a lot of other environmental issues, primarily because it falls into an eco-sensitive zone, and has caused severe issues both in terms of economic rights and as well as the social infrastructure that would be reached out. Another fascinating factor, I'm just going to pull back to my the fact of the cover slide being focused on child-friendly cities. And I know there is a growing recognition among different cities across the world to try and look at the perspective of children in the way how cities are trying to envision on. But when you look at the whole idea of looking at the cities, in Dehradun, this is not a mere concept. Dehradun is often called as the school capital of the country, primarily because of the host of institutions that it hosts. And also, when you look at the geographic configuration, you have at least 3 schools per 10 square kilometer. That's quite a number to actually see. And that brings in this whole conversation of the need to look at children rather than just a concept, but also in the way how to look at this. This slide gives you a constant picture, an image of a day-to-day scenario in the city, where in front of any school you would try and see how children are basically vulnerable to most of these accidents. And in fact, a publication in 2015 talks about the reports of accidents, especially with the road crashes, and 50% being attributed to school children. And that's primarily because of the lack of infrastructure that really talks about it, and also in the way how they kind of interlink and the impediments are there. Even if there are infrastructure facilities, there are several impediments for children to basically use them, and also obstruction basically makes them to be devoid of use and also affect their safety and security because they are pushed down to the roads. Now, more than being a concept, the whole idea was to try and look at improving this particular concept because students were coming and moving in day. It's a day-to-day activity. It's not like one-time stuff. You have 30,000 students coming in and going out of the city on a day-to-day basis. So this need to be kind of taken into consideration. And that gave us the idea of looking at a specific goal on looking at 11.2 that talks about affordable and sustainable transport systems. Now that we embarked on that sort of a conversation, it became important for us to really see that, if this is the state of children, and we have an opportunity kind of looking at the lens, why not go a little more crazy to try and look at how children will really enjoy this journey rather than just provisioning street infrastructure. So that gave us this whole idea to go a little bit crazy on the whole idea of looking at public streets and how you can activate them and how you can kind of use them as a medium to kind of promote learning through the journey. Given that as a factor, we needed to kind of start with one big exercise. So I think being children are stakeholders, communicating about the SDGs, communicating about this, needed to be done in a more holistic manner rather than talking about big targets and what needs to be achieved. So we really brought it down to the level in which where we wanted to understand how students are commuting or what are the ways they were doing. So we went to almost 34 schools in the equity area, conducted large-scale surveys, and in fact it resulted in mapping some of these solutions that were actually present out there. So we went out to them, mapped which route was being taken, and large-scale studies from that was being analyzed to really take up this. And when you kind of summarize, if I have to summarize that survey in detail, we have about 25% of students who are walking to school on a day-to-day basis. And now that's considerably a very good benchmark to really start with. And we wanted to emphasize that and use that as a medium to kind of nudge design interventions that will enhance and try to look at how do we increase the non-motorized means of transportation or the shared means of transportation for that matter. And to see that 50% of this entire trip that was being was being done on a commute-based environment or something like that. So the whole idea was to try and look at it from a way that it's not just being administered from top to down, but rather to work along with children to co-create some of these interventions and to see that they have some sort of accountability and vesting them and making them as SDG champions. Where most of the times when cities try to take up this opportunity, it's mostly driven from the top-down approach. But here we thought, we should make the children custodians of these sort of data points and make sure that they continue to kind of deliver on this and see that they have some sort of accountability. We did this not just by doing something, calculating the survey points, but also sitting out with them, trying and understand which are the points where there is a maximum impact, which are the routes that children are taking from home to school, and how do we really identify these points. So as you can see, the dots that are actually put in are all the schools, and the colored lines are basically the lines where children actually travel, take these routes to really come in. So you had an opportunity to network, you had an opportunity to collaborate. So a holistic urban design of some of these solutions would actually result in a better solution to do this. Our perception of localization, and I think thanks to the SDG Cities Challenge, is that it has reinforced our belief that there is a whole extent of localization possible, because when you kind of look at the country's national indicator framework, there are about 320 indicators. And but the state was actually asked to do that. The state came up with another set of 500 indicators or odd. So that becomes a cumbersome exercise for the city to try and report on this on a regular basis. So we thought, why not we use this as a medium to try and reduce the amount of indicators and to report them efficiently, and choice of the indicators that would depict all of these information that is on there. So we developed an indicator matrix that was about 18 indicators that talked about accessibility, safety, and a learning-based commute, which will also influence and push the city to try and take efforts in terms of maintaining this infrastructure, because it's not just about putting infrastructure in place, but also in maintaining them to see that their entire life cycle is really benefited. We also made an effort in terms of try to map these linkages with the SDGs, so as to see that in the foreground they help us to try and see how we can report this, and also to kind of contribute this conversation to some of these national and international forums where this whole discourse with UNICEF that they're talking about the set of indicators that are missing from the children's perspective. There's no reporting something that is done on these conversations. So we thought it would be a nice opportunity to try and contribute to this growing body of literature that can actually try and converse on the whole effect of SDGs with respect to children. The road ahead is quite challenging. The way how we also try to see this is that we are setting up some of these interventions. We are trying to test and prototype some of these interventions that have been conceived, and also co-create some of this by using tactical urbanism exercises. We've also trying to create a concept design guideline so that no matter where the city is trying to position public infrastructure, they have some things that are learnings from the conversations that we have with children, and also the co-creation exercises try to feed in, which will propel the thought of not really restricting yourselves to national guidelines, but also to bring in the whole element of localization. We also are trying to create a DIY toolkit where each child can, in fact, envision the way how the street in front of his school is going to try and look like, and also kind of get his inputs on what his colors are, what are the materialities. So primarily a way that is driven, because generally most of these designs are done, an adult is correcting another adult's mistake, or somebody saying that no, this didn't work, so we use another option. But here was an opportunity to kind of go to children and try and understand what they really want and how are we trying to do this, and in a way that is manageable and also amenable to the city, so as to see that they become custodians of this rather than the city having to take the exercise of just propelling and sending this out. So you're trying to build a whole ecosystem services based on that. And I think we're thankful that we're part of a cohort which has excellent examples of the way how the cities are trying to localize. But yes, this is our venture into this, and thank you. That's about it for me.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for your wonderful presentations today. There's a wealth of information there that we heard today. Look, we are opening and we're asking everyone who's on the call now to please put your questions into the chat section so that we can ask the panelists any of your questions. I think something I'd like to start with, I think each of you have touched on why you were involved in this challenge, and I think something that came through clearly, there's no one answer to how you localise the SDGs. But I think what's interesting is we all sort of use the term localising in a different manner. What does localising actually mean? And I hear from you each that actually it's what's important to the local community where you are, and therefore allowing them to have some identification with the SDGs, and which is aligned with their values, is going to allow them to move forward in supporting some of these ideas that you have. Sabaresh, you sound like you've done a lot of work in the city and had a very child-led involvement in the project. Are you seeing that the SDGs are allowing you to move forward with the project of making it a more child-friendly, safer city, that they allow, they're acting as a lever for you to do that? Or are they helping you to prioritise decision-making? Or is it that government just likes the sound that you're aligning with the SDGs, so they say yes? Like, what are the SDGs actually doing to help you move this project forward?
So I think that's a very interesting question, because it's like the chicken and egg situation. You don't really know what the SDGs is trying to really, whether it's trying to empower you or is it trying to be used as a mechanism to try and get engaged projects. But the only good factor that I see that there is work in progress, there's some sort of a accountability mechanism that is really trying to step in. Because initially when projects try to kind of start working on it, you don't really ask them on what is the progress or what is the outcome of this. So we are trying to move from more of an output-oriented decision-making towards an outcome-based positioning model with respect to projects, which helps us in a way to try and talk about overlaps, interlinkages, which was totally non-existent when the SDGs were not really being brought into the frame.
Thank you. I think a similar question, Jared, to you. You mentioned, can you change the SDGs in some ways to make it relevant in the university context? I wonder, have you thought, or how have you discussed, what do the SDGs mean to a university in the sense of what are you trying to achieve? Is it that actually it just needs to be that the SDGs, if every student walked away of coming through a university program and they understood and knew about the SDGs, then in actual fact, the university could tick a box to say, actually, we really have embedded them by the fact that we have 54,000 students who now know what they are and will take that with them going forward. How is, other parts of the university, when you look at it holistically, thought about localising the SDGs?
Good. That's a good question. I can talk to it to a small extent, but because it's sort of outside of where I work within the university, I don't have full knowledge of it. I can say that through our sustainability planning, we do recognise that, as you say, I suppose the graduate outcomes, or the outcome, the abilities and skills and experience of our graduates is the biggest way the university can have an impact on sustainability, whether you measure that by the SDGs or otherwise. And that was a key factor in probably a shift for the university's current sustainability plan, which went from being, before it was very much a sort of a resource focused, are we being energy and water efficient, to actually thinking more broadly, what's the university's impact, and that teaching and learning and research are where we can have a big impact. In terms of the extent to which the SDGs or any other framework of sustainability is measured within that, it is something that I know my colleagues are looking at, and we have a statement around graduate attributes and sustainability and being globally minded is part of that, although it doesn't explicitly mention the SDGs. So it is definitely part of the university's thinking, and as I said, I am aware that as part of the current next 10-year strategy, the opportunity to embed the SDGs into that more fully is being discussed, and the merits of it debated along with many other factors. So, but I'm not close enough to that to know exactly where it's headed.
Thank you. And then Emily, so I suppose a similar question to you. We're hearing three different ways in which, when we talk about localizing the SDGs and what that actually means, it's really what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve by using this framework. And you highlighted a number of elements of aligning those with your CSP, your Community Strategic Plan. Are you finding that the language of the framework, how it's presented, is something that you can use easily with your community to align it with like the language that you've already, I suppose, educated them on to a degree through the CSP? Or is it helping you, or is it hindering you, or is it, an internal document? How are you managing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I think the SDGs as a framework are a good tool for the community, but I think, as I kind of touched on at the start of my presentation, they can get kind of too big to comprehend almost. So we have done some preliminary community engagement around at the goal level, what priorities the community have, which has given us some really useful information, but kind of like with all community engagement, you kind of have to be a bit careful with managing priorities and also managing expectations, and that again comes back to that localizing conversation. What actually is within our sphere of control as a local government, and what do we have to say yes? Like, obviously our community is quite passionate about this, but it's actually not something that we can change. So interestingly, we've done some work quite recently around COVID, where we brought together a bit of a task force to take action in the COVID space, and particularly around the economic factors which have been a result of COVID, let's say. And part of that has been the City of Newcastle taking quite an active role in drafting up advocacy letters to state and federal government in some spaces, particularly around youth unemployment. Like here in the City of Newcastle, we have really high youth unemployment, quite significantly higher than the state average, and obviously quite affected by the COVID lockdowns. So that would be an example, I guess, of like where we've had to take, obviously it would be nice to be giving a whole heap of youth jobs, but at a local level that's just not something we can do. And it's similar with the SDGs. There are a lot of things in there that we would of course love to be solving with the snap of fingers, but at a local level it's just not realistic. So yeah, I think there's a middle ground where certainly we want the community engaged and educated around the SDGs, but being realistic about what at a local government level we can actually do.
Thomas, I think we have a question. Would you like
We have a question in the chat. Yeah. It is directed at you, Emily. Are you finding any conflicts that you anticipate between the port, local community, and SDGs?
So obviously, we have one of the major coal ports in the world here in Newcastle, and that sort of isn't something that's going to go away anytime soon. But actually, we've been working quite closely on some of our collaborative groups with the Port Authority, the Newcastle Port Authority, and also the Port Waratah Coal Service, because I don't know if other people have experienced this, but as private companies, they've actually taken a lot of action in the SDG space in terms of their corporate alignment and their focus on delivering on targets that apply to their space that they're working in. So we've actually been working quite closely with them, learning quite a bit about the journey that they've been on, and Port Waratah Coal Service is actually probably a really good one for people to check out their website, because they've done some really interesting mapping of the broader economy and different suppliers around the SDGs. So I would encourage you to jump on and check out their website, actually. We've actually been working closely with some not-for-profits as well. So Compass Housing up here has been really active in the SDG space, and they actually happen to be in our building too, which is quite handy. So we've been working with them around advocacy of the SDGs and raising awareness and running webinars and things like this for the community. There hasn't been heaps of conflict, I'm sorry to say. I know everyone loves drama. But no, we've been quite a happy little family up here. It's just, getting on and doing it, which is the big challenge. And yeah, we're trying. We're really trying.
Fantastic.
That's really great. That's really good to hear. Thanks for the question, Madhu, as well.
Just I suppose a final question. So obviously all three of you signed up to the SDGs Cities Challenge, and this is our pilot year. Can you share a learning that you think has been valuable and assisted you in the direction that you're going to next? Sabaresh, start with you.
Sure. I think that when we initially wanted to kind of understand how do we kind of progress with SDGs, because there is no enabling factor or no incentive to kind of do this. And the perspective was that, why do we have to do this? Why do we have to do such sort of a report? Or why do we have to do some sort of a reporting from this whole idea of not having any incentive? But through the process, I've seen the entire management, also the people who are actually on board along with us, they see value addition in the process. The fact is that it's not what the outcome is. It's not always about the outcome on what you're going to really get. But through this, you try and get and build this, and because we've used this as a framework in a pilot case, like the Chai City project. Now, this is being used in different sort of SDGs, not necessarily SDG 11, but some of our other projects as well. We've started using them as a framework and a reporting standard. So that has brought in a call for action, whether which was not there. So I think that's a very good learning to persistently start with.
Fantastic. Jared, how do you think the program has assisted you in moving forward with the SDGs?
So I think for me personally, the fundamental thing has just been giving me confidence that localization is a valid thing you can do. So it sort of helped to move from almost not a fear, but awareness in engaging with the SDGs, because they were so global, and having had experience, for example, some of our student stakeholders are not afraid to protest and blockade buildings if they think we're greenwashing or not doing enough. So yeah, as I say, having confidence that localization is a process. If you do it in the right way and bring people along with you, you can still maintain that connection to the global goals whilst making them more locally relevant. So it's still a task to be done, but at least I know that there's a process there. You wouldn't be sort of exposed and out on your own trying to fiddle with the targets.
Absolutely. Emily, is there anything else you'd like to say before we finish up the session and these fantastic remarks that all three of you have had?
I think the main thing that I really want to take away from it is that collaboration is the key. I mean, we've had some really beneficial relationships here within our region, but the City Challenge has expanded our network of people who are motivated and active in this space, and we've learned so much from each other. So, and even in these conversations today, I'm like, oh, well, I'll just write that down, I think. There's key learnings all the time that, if you're just up here in Newcastle, enjoying the beautiful landscape, you don't get those conversations on a daily basis or a monthly basis, or, have that opportunity to have those discussions around, hey, we're struggling with this aspect at the moment. Has anyone else experienced that? So yeah, it's been so beneficial in terms of expanding networks and also collaborating with cities going through similar issues. Yeah.
Thank you. Look, I'd like to thank all of our speakers today. Emily from Newcastle, Sabaresh from India, and Jared from Melbourne. Thank you, all coming from very diverse areas, and I think, Emily, what you said, collaborating with cities and people from very different cities and parts of the world is the way that we learn and we talk to SDG 17 collaboration and partnerships. Thank you everyone who's on the call for joining us also. Now, if you'd like to return to the closing session for today of the symposium, that is with Marley Holloway-Clark, and she's going to, or he's going to recap on today and what's been going on today. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you again in the sessions tomorrow for the last day of the symposium. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.